Well, hello, and welcome back. I'm AJ O'Neill, and I'm going to be your instructor for tonight's Beyond Code Live. And tonight, we're going to be talking about HTML. More specifically, we're going to be talking about what HTML isn't. This is an introduction to HTML, but I think that it's important to distinguish between what it is and what it isn't, in the same way that it's important to distinguish when someone says, "That's a nice set of wheels," that they're actually referring to a car, not a set of wheels, because we're in this realm of things that are highly technical. There are more people who are beginners than there are people who are experts by a factor of 10, and people tend to call things by the wrong name. And if we're going to learn about something and learn it well, it's good to know which pieces are which and how they fit together. So with that, if at any point during this session you have an aha moment where something clicks for you, maybe something didn't click before, you feel like you really grasped the concept, go ahead and give this a thumbs up. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So first, here we have some HTML. This is what HTML looks like. And I'm actually going to skip ahead a second and show you what each piece of this is bit by bit. It's important to be able to recognize that, first of all, you can look at this and you can pick things apart in it. With anything, there's lots of stuff that you don't understand, but start with what you do understand. So let's just take a look at this for a second. We see a less than sign. We see letters of the alphabet, HTML. We see a greater than sign. We see that there is another line and there's some space. We see that there's another less than sign. We see there's some more letters, another space, some more letters, an equals, a quote, some more letters, a colon, a space, some more letters, a quote, a greater than sign. It's important to just look at the things that you know. And now we could take this a little further. HTML, you've heard HTML before. It's not a completely foreign concept. You know what the word body means. You may not know why it says body on the screen right now, and it might say it for any reason or no reason at all. But you know what the word body means. Likewise, you know what style means. You know what an equal sign does. It typically is saying that two things are equal, or it's saying that one thing should be assigned to another. And we see an exclamation mark, we see an ampersand, we see LT, we see a semicolon. It's important to know what the names of these things are, because I do find that quite often people don't know what the names of the characters are. They don't know the difference between, for example, a semicolon here, which is a comma with a period on top, and a colon, which is two periods stacked on top of each other. That's important to know the difference. It's important to know what an ampersand is. So that right there, that little squiggly do, that almost looks like a kind of a weird G but backwards, cursive G but backwards, that's an ampersand. So, and then we have a slash. This is very important. This is a normal slash. How do we know it's a normal slash? Because if I go up into a URL, the slashes that are part of a URL are just normal slashes. So normal slash, forward slash, normal slash. Okay? This is the entirety of the HTML language right here. If you can pick apart these individual pieces, everything else in HTML is just made of these pieces. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit, and we're going to go look at just some definitional stuff here. So I'm actually going to start down at this table. The first thing, which we actually didn't see there, the first thing every HTML document, actually, let me back up a step. One of the problems with HTML, and one of the reasons that I'm teaching it in this way, is that there is no real definition for what HTML is. Or rather, there is a real definition, but there is nothing that follows the rules. So imagine if you had a bunch of street signs out in the street. You had a sign that was red and said gargle splat, and you had another sign that was yellow and said stop, and you had a sign that was blue and it said ditch, and you just have a bunch of stuff and there's no real rhyme or reason to it. People could go to the signs and maybe someone knows what the signs mean because they wrote down in a book. Gargle splat means turn left 3 times. But no one would know what to do with that information. If no one would come up to that sign and be able to interpret it or know what it does. And I know that's a weird example, but that's kind of the way that HTML is. It is, in essence, completely arbitrary with a very, very small set of confines. And one of the reasons that web development was traditionally very hard is that Microsoft interpreted it differently. They had their own set of rules, and Google did it differently, and they had their own set of rules, and Apple did it differently, and they had their own set of rules, and everybody had their own set of rules, and nobody really agreed on anything. And then when HTML was standardized, it was basically everybody's rules work, which is, kind of not a good way to go about this. So everything that I'm saying here is completely optional. HTML is probably the only language where everything in the language is optional. You can have everything or nothing or anything in between, and there is no way to say whether it's correct or incorrect because there is no fixed definition for it. So with that nightmare out of the way, let's just confront that beast and let it be what it is. Every HTML document, because HTML is intended for books and for newspaper articles and things like that, that's what it's designed for. Every HTML document is supposed to begin with a line that is the file type. And many different file formats have a first line that are often called literally named the magic line, and the magic line lets a program that is looking at the file just read the very first line of the file to determine what the file is. So a program doesn't have to see that a file is named .html if it sees that the first line is this line. Doc type bang, bang doc type. We call the exclamation mark bang doc type space HTML with opening angle or less than sign, and closing angle or greater than sign on either side. That is just the very first thing. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't mean anything other than that it says this is an HTML document. It is equivalent in all practical senses to putting .html at the end of a file. But not all data exists in a file with a file name, so it's good for the very first line of some data to contain what the type of the file is. And so that's what that is. Now after that, everything that you see in HTML is an arbitrary tag. What I mean by arbitrary is it doesn't actually matter what you put in the tag. A tag is anything that begins and ends with an opening and closing angle bracket. And there are 2 types of tags. There are tags that you close manually, so you can open a tag like this, and I could put, instead of here the word tag, I could put in the word foo, I could put in the word body, I could put in just about anything that I want that is alphabetical characters, and also including the hyphen. A hyphen can also be part of a tag name. So I can put in just about anything that I want, and then a closing tag simply must match the name of the opening tag and have a normal, everyday / in front of it. That is one type of tag. The other type of tag is what's known as a self-closing tag. So this type of tag, we can put things inside of the tag. And we'll talk more about this in a second. And then there's a self-closing tag. And a self-closing tag is simply a tag that doesn't require an ending tag because it begins and ends in itself. And the way that it ends is with a space / So it's 2 characters that end the tag, space and / They go together. That ends the tag. Now, there are 2 important things to know about tags, is that they can have something inside of them. So we could put a word, we could open the tag, and then we could put a word like hello, and then we could close the tag and we can put text inside of or in between two tags. And then there are what is known as attributes. And attributes are arbitrary names. So this attribute that I called adder, it doesn't mean anything to anyone. This is completely made up. I could put foo here, I could put whatever here, I could put example here. And then equals, and then quotes. They could use single quotes or double quotes. And in some cases, where there's no special characters in between the quotes, I could just not have quotes at all, although that's not a good practice. It's not recommended that you do that, but it is legal. Although technically everything is legal in HTML. There is nothing that you can type that is not proper HTML, because like I said before, there is no true set of rules. It is just conventions that people go by. But this, assuming that you're following the tag convention, and that you want it to be recognized by most programs that can recognize HTML, you can have an attribute, which we could also call this a key, and then you can have a value. So I could put here name equals AJ, or age equals 37. And it is always what's known as a string, meaning that it is the character encoding. For example, there is the number 5. If you add the number 5 and the number 5, you get 10. But if you add the letter 5 and the letter 5, you get the string 55. So that's what I mean by that. So attributes are always strings. And these attributes, you can have many of them inside of a tag. So I could have a tag, and I could have name equals Bob and age equals 37. And then I could have something inside of that tag, like the word hello, and then I could end that tag. And I'm just picking these words at random as an example because they're completely arbitrary. We define what we want HTML to mean. So we basically make up something, and then we define what we want it to mean. And that is done not in HTML, but is done in the other components. There are 3 other components to a web page that can do stuff. So we have HTML, we have the document object model, also known as the DOM. We have CSS, and we have JavaScript. And there are a couple of other things that we can throw in there too, but that's kind of the basis. So anyway, so we've gone over tags extensively at this point. And then there are also escapes. So in every language we have escapes, and an escape is basically a special character that is followed by other characters that either do or don't have meaning, that is special meaning. So, for example, if I wanted to print a heart, there's an emoji for a heart, and there's an emoji for a copyright sign. Technically, you shouldn't put those in HTML as such, but instead you should use the code for them. There's an international code of all characters from every language and every alphabet in the world, including all of the emojis. The emojis are actually considered a language in the same way that English or Chinese are considered languages. So there is a language set of characters, of which emoji is one of the characters sets. And if we wanted to put in the heart, which maybe I'll show later. Actually, I think, can I show this right now? Let me try this. beyondcode.duckdns.org. Whoops. Yeah. So this right here, down at the bottom, let me see if I can make that bigger. That heart right there is made using this escape code. So because there's not a proper way for us to copy and paste it directly into as text, we use an escape. And the only way that you would know this is by looking it up. There's a big giant table that tells you what all of the codes are for any particular character in any particular language. And if you do have one that you could copy and paste, like, well, I won't go into it right now, but there is a way to inspect it and then look at what the code is for it. But I won't go into that right now. So there's about a dozen of these escapes that are named, things like and copy and trade for the copyright symbol, the trademark symbol, and amp for the ampersand symbol in case you wanted to actually display an ampersand. Since ampersand is a special character, you technically cannot display it without escaping it. So because it is an escape, you can't use it unless you escape it itself. So and amp is the way that you would display an ampersand. Technically, if you just put an ampersand and nothing else, what should happen is that you would see nothing. It would be an error that would be ignored. Now, in most browsers, it'll actually say, oh, there's an error here. The error is that there's an empty ampersand. They probably meant ampersand amp semicolon. I'll just put in what they probably meant to do. And this is one of the terrible things about HTML, is that it is difficult to know whether what you're doing is right or wrong, and how when you compound things that are incorrect together will happen, because typically speaking, a web browser will not ever tell you that something was wrong. It will make a decision and go forward, and this can have sometimes disastrous consequences. So I do believe that it's very, very important to understand fundamentally what HTML is at the very basic level of the syntax. So here we have a comment. Now a comment, it's important to include the space here, but it is less than, or rather open angle, bang, hyphen, hyphen, space. That's how you start a comment. Now I could type anything in here, all the way up until a space, hyphen, hyphen, close angle. Anything inside of there will be ignored. Spaces will be ignored, letters will be ignored. If I put new lines inside, they'll be ignored. If I put tags inside, they'll be ignored. Everything will just be ignored. Nothing will be displayed to the screen. We'll talk about things displaying to the screen in a second. This will become much clearer once we look at an example. In fact, maybe I should have just opened up the example first of the page that we're going to look at. And then if your cat walks across the keyboard, that is considered to be text. So anything that causes an error, or that anything that is not special or that causes an error, is considered to be text. And so hopefully, fingers crossed, if you're lucky, when you do something that causes an error, you'll just see it on the screen rather than it being hidden away, if you're lucky. Okay, so with that said, there was one other thing. Before we go look at the example, I just kind of want to give this visual imagery to you. A web app is kind of like a paint by numbers piece of art. The HTML is essentially the blank canvas. It's where you define what the numbers are. So for example, so these are very common conventions. They are not necessary. They don't necessarily mean anything, but they are kind of defined as rules, but they're rules that can be broken and have no consequence if you break them. But HTML, in addition to starting with the bang doc type HTML thing that looks kind of like a mix between a tag and a comment, the next bit should be HTML, an HTML tag, and then it should end with an HTML tag. And then there are two options after that. One is head and one is body. And head is for things that describe the page, much like if you consider a research paper, because keep in mind HTML was invented for research papers. So much like a research paper would have information in the abstract that is not part of the paper but would be used for indexing in a library, the head section is used for abstract information about the document. And that actually includes things like the little icon that you see in every web page is defined in that head abstract, if you will. And then the body is for all the things that are intended to be displayed on the page. So, and things that are ignored that are not displayed on the page. But in the ideal technical sense, anything that is in the head is not displayed on the page, although that's not always true. And anything that is in the body that isn't a comment is displayed on the page, although that is not always true. There are exceptions to all of these things, and this is a very strong convention that is used pretty much universally and is actually defined in reference material. So you can read up on what body is supposed to be. That said, we have what we do inside. When I was talking before about how we can have basically any tag name we want, that's kind of like the paint by numbers. So I can create a space, and I could call this space foo, and I could call this space bar, and I could give this space an attribute. I could give it number equals 1, and I could give this an attribute number equals 2. So we can be completely arbitrary in HTML. We basically just create spaces where things could be. Now, I want to make this more concrete. So we're going to take a look at my resume. So actually, I think I already had it. Give me just 1 second here to pull this up, because I think I had it up in a tab. There we are. Let's see if I can bring this on over. Yes, because I had this open in a particular way that makes for a wonderful example. Okay, we're going to bring my resume over to the screen. And my resume is in HTML, and it is styled so that it will print to PDF. And this is actually included in the course material, this template, so that you can start building your own resume. And this is actually one of your first assignments, will be, without actually knowing HTML, is going to be take a template resume and just use the old noggin to look through and change it to be a resume for you. Okay, so you're going to do this, and I'm going to take a look at the HTML here in just a second. Let's see. So yes, this is styled such that if I print, it's supposed to fit on one page. I goofoed that, I suppose. If we don't print headers and footers, there we go. We don't print headers and footers, then this will print as a PDF. We can save to PDF, or we can print it, and it looks almost exactly, there we go, print backgrounds. So now it looks exactly on the printer the way that it looks in HTML. So this is quite a nice resume template for online use. Could be improved a touch more so that it looked better in the web presentation, but as far as print goes, it's great. People understand it when they look at it, and you say print to PDF, they get it, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the HTML of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Inspect Element. Okay, let me bring my element inspector over here. I'll try to make this a little bit bigger, although it's a little bit hard when we're screen sharing like this to get things just right. But we're going to try to make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to try, I know there's a way to get rid of this here. We're going to click this button. There we go. That gets rid of it. Okay, so now we can hover over the different sections in the HTML. And this is a great way to learn HTML. We can hover over and we can see what things are selected. And you're going to see in here there's a lot of common conventions, even things that are standardized, although the way that they work will be different in almost every web app because people just choose to do things differently. So we have, I'm not going to go into the head section quite yet, but let's just take a look at the body section. We have a div, and a div is essentially standardized as a meaningless square or block. That there is no given meaning other than that it is a block, and by that I mean a block as opposed to a line. There's another thing that we don't see here immediately that's called a span, and a span functions as a line, and a div functions as multiple lines. And a div might have something, a div could have something inside that is not text. For example, it could have an image inside, which is its own type of tag. But we have here a lot of common conventions being used. You'll notice H1 being repeated in lots of places, UL, LI. Most everything in here is what we call semantic HTML, meaning that it follows well-known conventions and standards, and it follows them in the spirit of what they were intended to mean. So you will see many, as you learn web development, you will see many examples of people doing it wrong, for lack of a better term, where they abuse something or use it without knowing what it was actually intended for, or that there is a standard for that thing, and they use it for a completely different purpose, kind of a hack job, say a duct tape and super glue type of thing, where they just throw stuff around, and because there's no real way to know when you've done something wrong, and the browser will always make a choice that results in things being displayed on the page, let me take one more step back here. The primary purpose of HTML, putting things in HTML in this semantic way, is for screen readers, because and for other applications that read a page. So Google search likes it when you have semantic HTML. So if you hear about SEO or search engine optimization, semantic HTML helps with that. Programs like Siri that are trying to determine information in an artificial intelligent or machine learning type way about documents that you have or things that you're visiting, they like things to be semantic. The purpose of being semantic, it doesn't benefit the average person at all. There's no benefit to me or to you. You would never know the difference between, when you look at HTML or the output of HTML, you will never be able to tell the difference between semantic HTML, meaning HTML that follows the rules intentionally, and just garbage. Because the way that it will display to someone who has sight will be identical. Where it's different is if you want a search engine or a machine or a person who is blind to be able to access your site through software that is reading the information on the page. For example, if a blind person were listening to my resume, with the software that they have, they would hear that there is the main section. It would probably start reading off the main section, and then it would let them know that there is an aside, meaning that there is some additional detail. So the screen reader software, depending on how they configured it, and I'm not very familiar with that type of thing, but the screen reader software would start to read the page in hopefully what would feel like top to bottom, and it would skip over certain things that were marked as basically skippable. Let me go ahead. Yeah, so it would know that this is a header because there's a common convention to use header and section. These are all common conventions. H2, divs, it wouldn't know what that is. It would have no idea what a div is or what a span is. And so when it comes across these things, it may not know what order to read them in. So it would probably just read them in the order that it sees them as it's going down the page. So actually, what we're looking at here, this is not actually HTML. You might notice there are arrows and such here. HTML does not have the ability to have arrows because HTML is a document format. So this is actually what is called the DOM. This is a visualization of the DOM. I'm going to switch over to the actual HTML, and you're going to see there's not much difference. There's no way to interact with this. So over here, when I'm looking at the DOM, what I'm looking at is basically the computer has followed the paint by numbers sequence and has interpreted everything as expected, and we're looking at it. So that's what this is. Here, the source is the computer has not interpreted this information in any way. It is just the raw information. So there's no way to click on anything to make it go away, or I can't edit anything. I can't delete. This is basically the printer-friendly representation of the HTML on the page as I myself wrote it. So what I want to do also to help kind of better explain what HTML is we're going to get rid of the stuff that isn't HTML. So I cannot change the source or the raw data of the HTML because that was transferred as a file. It was downloaded to my computer. But if I go under the Elements tab here, this is technically the DOM. This is the Document Object Model. This is the HTML has been brought into, basically, it's been turned into a program along with the other pieces, the CSS and the JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is, one of the neat things about a web browser is you can live edit the web browser. You can't do this with most types of programs. Most types of programs, you have to recompile them, you have to rewrite the code, resend the code. In web browsers, we can do really cool things like just delete the CSS. So bye-bye CSS. Okay, now this is the HTML only version of my resume. I deleted almost all of the styling from it. There's some CSS you can't delete because it's built into your browser. So for example, you can see here that there are bulleted lists. Now, if we were to take all the style away, there would be no bulleted lists. If we were to take all the style away, then we would only see spaces in between words. It would say A.J. O'Neill space, visionary space, so on and so on, space, 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 space. This would just be one paragraph of text if we removed all of the styling and it was only the HTML. It would simply be invisible boxes that you can't see and the text that is inside of those boxes. That's all that it would be. But the browser itself has built-in styles that technically can be removed, but you would never really want to. And the built-in styles follow some of these conventions and rules. So this right here, I will go ahead and look at this in our inspector. We have a UL, which this is a common convention to use for unordered list. This is actually beyond convention. It's standardized. And then we have LI. And LI is also standardized. And UL means unordered list. LI means list item. Unordered list basically means, it doesn't actually mean that there's no order to the list. There is an order to the list. These items will always appear in this order, exactly as they were defined. List item, the first list item, the second list item, the third list item. But what unordered list means is that there is no label to the list. So an ordered list would be if it was labeled 1, 2, 3, or ABC, or I, double I, triple I, IV, etc. That would be an ordered list. The unordered lists simply don't have labels. Now, lots of navigation is actually ordered list as well. So if I were to, let's say I'm just going to go to another website real quick. Well, I'll go to our sample site here. So this is actually also an unordered list. This is one list item and this is another list item, but rather than being built out from top to bottom in the way that this is, it's built out from left to right. And instead of having a bullet as the delimiter, it has some spacing as the delimiter. So just to kind of give you an idea. And we're not going to go over, the purpose of this is not to go over the couple dozen or so well-known or well-standardized HTML tags. The purpose is just to expose you to them, because what you're going to find is that everybody uses them differently, just as you saw here. Here's a list item being used like a bulleted list. Here's a list item being used as an item that is in a list, but it's in a list that is not in the way that we necessarily always think of a list. So these items are related. It makes sense for them to be a list. What are the pages that I can visit on this site? Well, let me enumerate them. Let me list them out for you. We can visit the blog page and we can visit the contact page. It makes sense for it to be a list. But like I said, you'll find that everyone uses these differently. And so you just kind of learn the conventions as you go. And HTML is not something that typically you should put on your resume for two reasons. One, you don't know HTML and you would have to really study it to know it well. And you can. And I recommend that you do if you're going to be really in front-end web development, especially if you're going to be in search engine optimization or in accessibility for screen readers, things like that. You really do want to know HTML and you want to know truly semantic HTML. But here's the thing. People who put HTML on their resumes don't know HTML from garbage, typically speaking, just in the 99% of the time. And another issue is that people who are looking for HTML on a resume don't know enough about HTML to know the difference between semantic HTML and garbage. So it's kind of a funny paradox. There's no reward for being good at HTML other than feeling proud in your heart that blind people can listen to your website and potentially get some SEO benefit. So it's a very thankless thing to learn, unfortunately. You're probably not going to get paid anymore for learning it versus the next guy who, or gal, or, I mean that guy generically, who can make the page look the same. And the looks happen through CSS. So that right there, the difference between this, where everything has the color and the shape and the style, and this, where we're looking at just text, that's not a difference of HTML. That is a difference of CSS, or cascading style sheets. So I wanted us to be really clear on that because I think that it is ridiculously important to know these foundational principles. So let's go back here, and we're about to wrap up. And you can read through some of this on your own. At this point, this language overview is a lot more thought-based than super pragmatic. Although I will be soon, we will be doing the introduction to the HTML homework, which is to recreate your present resume just by fumbling your way through the HTML, and it's already set up semantically. So your job is really just to navigate through the things that are on the page and become familiar with, for example, when there's an ampersand LT, when you want to put in a less than sign, because obviously if a less than sign or the open angle is the start of a tag and you want to put a less than sign, then that would cause an error, and it could either cause things to be ignored or it could be displayed, but you won't know what it is until you try it. Whereas if you encounter it in a document that exists that you're trying to change, it should cause the brain to go on a little bit, and you can look back and forth between the two. You can look at the source that you have. You can right click, inspect element, and you can click on source, and you can do a search, and you can say, okay, find me, let's say we want to look for ampersands because we want to look for things that are escaped. All right, well, there's something there, and here, and here. And so you could look, okay, well, what does this mean? Let's take a look. Software. Can we find software anywhere in this page? Okay, there's software, and then there's an and sign. So this escape sequence, this is the named code for an and sign. Got it. That's what I mean, is you want to be able to have just the familiarity and confidence to be able to navigate through. And all of this class stuff, class is the most important attribute that you will encounter in HTML because class has a special meaning, and it refers to the instructions for what something should look like. So somewhere in CSS, there is a block that is called date, and inside of that, it might say things like what font to use, and what font size to use, and what color to use, and how large it should be, and how much spacing there should be. And all of that is just a list. Okay, so let's go back. We want to go back here and just kind of try to wrap up. So HTML is predominantly opening and closing angle brackets with some text inside that's a tag, or opening angle bracket with a bang and some dashes and a space, and those are comments until they're closed, and ampersands with either shorthand names or number codes for special characters, such as the ampersand, the opening angle bracket, and special language characters like emojis. Okay. HTML is formless. It is how you describe the paint by numbers sheet, and CSS is what you use to paint by the numbers. So let's go back down here. I do want to mention HTML is not a programming language. Please do not tell people that you're learning programming when you're learning HTML. You may also be learning programming. You probably are also learning programming, but HTML is not a programming language. And the way that we can tell this is because you cannot add numbers and you cannot create a loop. If you cannot add numbers and you cannot create a loop, you do not have a programming language. Very simple. It is a language, but it is not a programming language. It is more of a design language. HTML, we already talked about this. It does not specify how things should look. Now, there is an exception to that. In the beginning, there were a lot of common conventions and even some standards for HTML to define things like color and size. That only works in email, or not it only works in email, but it is only presently used in email, because what they quickly found out was that either they were going to have to add a million things that were specific things in HTML for every possible thing someone would ever want to do, or they would need a separate language that was more specifically a styling language and let HTML just be a scaffolding language. And so the styling language that emerged was CSS. And that's what specifies shape, size, color, even position. And it's kind of funny because you can actually position things relative to other things. So imagine if your HTML element, let's say, represents this particular area over here, but with the style you say you will display over here. That'd be kind of a weird thing, but this happens. Don't worry too much about it, just letting you know. Okay, we talked about, HTML is not something to brag about. You can put it on your resume if you're applying for a job and the job says you need to know HTML. I mean, you can put whatever you need to put on there that's honest. Just know that if someone is asking you to put HTML on your resume, the person who designed that post doesn't know what HTML is, because otherwise they would be asking for you to put down your knowledge of accessibility in screen readers if they wanted to signify that you actually knew HTML, because that's what HTML is actually for. Otherwise, they would be asking you to put down your design language skills, such as CSS and SVG. Okay, so we talked about HTML is not the document object model. HTML is text, whereas the document object model is something that is living. It's basically the program that is created by HTML. So you feed HTML in and you get a DOM out. And you feed HTML in with CSS and with JavaScript, and those three things together make the DOM. So HTML is not JavaScript. It is not WebGL or WebAssembly. It is not CSS. It is not SVG. HTML is not any of those things. And we talked about CSS it's the colors, the style, the where things should go, the what they should look like. It is draping the HTML with visual goodness. This typically does not affect as much the way the screen reader or a search engine would understand the application. There are a couple of things that matter. For example, if you use CSS to hide things or misplace them, it can give you a penalty on Google search results because it will look deceptive, like you're trying to create some sort of spammy page where there's hidden forms or hidden interactions that a user might click something and it might then cause them to download something they didn't intend or stuff like that. So if you do too wonky of things, it appears spammy, and likewise screen readers may not understand what to do if something appears in the HTML in one place but is radically positioned somewhere on the opposite side of the screen in the CSS, which is possible but generally not desirable. JavaScript is kind of like our barista. JavaScript is for how to listen, how to respond, and what to do in between. JavaScript manages what happens when I click, what happens when the page is loaded, what happens when I scroll, all of these types of event sort of things that are interaction things, those are happening in JavaScript. And so if we paint by the numbers well and we include all of those pieces, then here's a representation of our beautiful web application, or a enhanced document, if you will. an interactive document. Symbolically, of course, this is obviously not a document, but I'm going with the paint by numbers thing here. So this is the kind of beauty that we can get out of it. And I talked about semantic HTML. I put a couple of tags here. I'll expand this out later, but the big list that you can see on W3 Schools is actually fairly good. Let's open that up just for a second. I'm not going to go over this, but just so you can see on the left-hand side here, if you were to read through each one of these things, you will get most of the common conventions are laid out here, as well as the newest common conventions they call semantic, which is kind of weird because essentially the definition they give right here is great. Examples of non-semantic elements, div and span, because they have no meaning. There's no defined meaning in any standard or specification or convention as to what div or span should mean or do. Whereas form, table, article, section, details, header, footer, all of these things, they actually don't say anything about where something should be positioned or what they should look like. They only define, for the purposes of a screen reader or a search engine, how should the information that is contained inside text, images, videos, audio, how do they relate to one another in terms of their grouping? This audio belongs in this section because it's related to this text. That helps a search engine, etc. Okay, and then this is what I believe to be the most important rule of HTML, is that if it sounds cool, don't do it. If people are excited about it, if someone's up on a conference talk and they're just getting really jazzed about how great something is, stay the letter L away from it because it's bad and it's going to break things. And I know this sounds kind of, well, it is absolutely contradictory. I'm basically telling you, every person out there that professes to be an expert and gets excited about some new thing or some way to do something in HTML, 99% of them, if not higher than that, are misleading you. And why should you believe me? Well, if you want things to work and to work well, so this is my definition of success for a web application, is that if I view it on my desktop or if I view it on my phone, at the base minimum level, I am able to read the information and complete tasks. That's my level for success. My level for success is not how does it fade and can it do 360-degree transformations and have 3D effects, and when you scroll, does it appear as if pages of a book are opening? That is not my definition of success. That is my definition of, in many cases, failure. Because what's most important to me in creating something is that people are able to use it and that it works reliably and consistently and well. And after that baseline is reached, adding on top of that, well, what if we put a little pizzazz in this? Just a little something nice. We put a little animation on this point. Don't ever hijack somebody's scroll, though. I hate it when Apple.com does it. Just ask yourself these questions before you implement something that's cool, because eventually you'll get to that point where you'll be able to implement things that are cool. Before you do that, ask yourself this. If I were using this, would it help me or hurt me if I had to do this every day? Because you also have to think about what type of user do you have? Is it somebody who is visiting the page once a month to read an article? Are they visiting the web app every single day because they're checking their messages? And consider, for the type of person that's likely to use this, if most people are only using it once a month because it's a news site, is what you're doing going to help them or hurt them? Is it going to be annoying or is it going to be helpful? And same thing on the other end. If somebody's going to use this every single day, if you put a wizard in something that people are going to use every single day and they always have to deal with daggone Clippy, it's not going to be a good experience for them. As cool as it would be to have a purple gorilla that's jumping on the screen and telling them things, or a shady-eyed paperclip, it's going to be annoying if it's a product that they use every day. So just things like that. So HTML is boring. It's supposed to be boring. We want it to be boring. And anything that is not boring typically breaks the experience for people that are especially on cheaper Android phones, which is about half the planet, and for people that are on screen readers, which typically, to be honest, most people don't care about because very few blind people are paying the bills of a company, you know. But if you want to look at it from a more pragmatic perspective of maybe you personally care about blind people, but selling your boss on blind people isn't going to be an easy sell because they got to focus on the bottom line. You could think about the way that Google is going to interpret the page, because the way that a blind person hears the page and the way that Google or other search engines interpret the page is probably going to be fairly similar when it comes to semantic HTML. So anyway, this, I don't know if you heard this story, but this was once a picture of Jesus. And somebody who was not skilled at restoring art was allowed to restore this. And as you can see, it didn't turn out well. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. And if it is broke, be cautious. Be boring with HTML. And we will be back in another session to talk more about the overview of HTML semantically, as well as cover the homework for how you can get access to that resume and start building your own. Well, I hope that this was useful for you. If you got a laugh, or if it was useful, or both, give it a single or triple thumbs up, but not double, because that will just unlike. And if you're interested in more like this, please subscribe. The links are in the description. And I would love to hear what are your questions, comments, or flame wars.